Why do we say rule of thumb? You've probably heard the phrase. Well, as a rule of thumb, maybe you've even used it yourself. It usually means a rough guideline, something that's generally true, but not exact. But have you ever stopped to wonder where that strange phrase came from? Why a thumb? And is it true that the phrase comes from an old law allowing husbands to beat their wives with a stick no thicker than their thumb? For years, that explanation spread across books, classrooms, and the internet. The problem is, it probably isn't true. The real story is buried much deeper in the past. If you've ever searched for the meaning of rule of thumb, you've likely encountered a disturbing claim. According to the story, English law once allowed a husband to physically discipline his wife, provided he used a stick no thicker than his thumb. Over time, people claimed this became known as the rule of thumb. It's a shocking story, and because it's shocking, it spread quickly. The problem is that historians have searched for evidence of such a law and have come up empty. There were certainly terrible laws and customs regarding women throughout history, but researchers have found no English law that actually created a legal rule of thumb based on the width of a man's thumb. In fact, the phrase appears in writing long before this explanation became popular. So if it didn't come from that law, where did it come from? Measuring without measuring tools. To find the answer, we need to travel back to a time before tape measures, before laser levels, before rulers were something everyone carried around. For most of history, people needed quick ways to estimate distances and sizes, and the easiest measuring tool was always attached to their body, their hands. Builders, farmers, tailors, brewers, and craftsmen regularly used fingers, palms, hands, feet, and thumbs as rough measuring tools. A thumb wasn't perfectly accurate. Everyone's thumb is a little different, but for many everyday tasks, it was close enough. Need a rough measurement? Use your thumb. Need a quick estimate? Use your hand. No precision required, just experience. The phrase rule of thumb begins appearing in English writings during the 1600s. One of the earliest references appears in discussions of craftsmanship and practical work. The phrase wasn't describing an exact scientific measurement. It meant something based on experience, a practical method that worked most of the time. In other words, a rule of thumb was a guideline, not a strict rule, not a law, not a precise calculation, just a useful approximation developed through practice. Exactly how we use the phrase today. Why the phrase survived. As technology improved, people gained access to more accurate tools. Rulers became common. Measurements became standardized. Precision became important. But the phrase remained. Why? Because humans constantly need shortcuts. Not every decision requires exact calculations. Sometimes we just want a simple guideline, a rule of thumb. Even today, people use rules of thumb in cooking, investing, fitness, construction, and everyday life. The original measuring technique faded away, but the expression survived. What's fascinating isn't just where the phrase came from. It's that millions of people continue using a piece of history without realizing it. Every time someone says, as a rule of thumb, they're repeating words that may be over 400 years old. The craftsmen are gone. The workshops are gone. The old measuring habits are gone. Yet the phrase remains, quietly traveling through centuries of history, hidden in everyday conversation. So why do we say rule of thumb? Not because of an ancient law, not because of a courtroom ruling, but because long ago, people often used their thumbs as simple measuring tools. The thumb wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. And over time, that practical idea became a phrase that still survives today. One more answer, buried in the past.
Subscribe and like for more Rootz answers.